Man, we have been inundated in the headlines recently with just brothers passing away untimely, man.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talking about DMX comes to mind instantly, you know, and Michael Williams.
Yep.
You know, we can sit and name them all a lot, man, but
Ecstasy from Houdini.
oh man, ecstasy from Houdini, you're absolutely right. You know, but
The list is endless.
it's endless and it's sad, but is it something that we're doing to ourselves? Is disease something that's self-inflicted on black men? You know, what's happening?
I believe it is well, initially I thought 100% self-inflicted because I thought through my journey, you know, and becoming a vegan that I am now,
Right.
that you learn that everything disease is caused by what you eat, by mucus,
You are what
which
you
is
eat.
created by, you know, we don't want to get into the details, but
But the lack of nutrition in
lack
the
of
food
nutrition.
that we consume.
Yep. And so I'm thinking 100% diet, but as we were talking offline before, you know, I got to put stress in there too. So I don't believe stress is self-inflicted. I think it could be self-prevented
Yeah.
through meditation, maybe exercise,
Nutrition?
but it's not self-inflicted. So with the stress and food, I think is self-inflicted, yes, but stress and other factors, I don't think, you know.
That we
what did we
that
say,
we impose
disease
it
or
on
illness?
ourselves.
Okay.
Illness, disease.
Okay.
You know, so I feel you 100% that typically we are either feeding or fighting disease with what we eat. You know what I'm saying? With what we put in our mouth. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. And to your point, I think that what we've witnessed so much in the recent days with black men is it harkens back to some of the topics we talked about in regards to men being providers, and we talk about black love, and all of these elements where black men have become marginalized to a large extent. So with those toxic, you know, realities that black men face, so much so, there's really no avenue for us to express how we feel. Because remember, men are known to be stoic, you know, based on that old concept of, you know, you just hold it in.
Yeah.
You know
Nobody
what I'm
wants to
saying?
hear.
Ain't nobody trying to hear you
Yeah,
complain, bro.
yeah.
Suck it up.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So as we suck it up, we've been sucking up so much of this toxic reality that now we're breaking down. And to your point, the stress is systemic and toxic, and it's something that we're not being able to discuss. It's something that we're not being able to realistically address with each other, because everybody might be going through it in their own little cave, right? And that's one of the things that we were taught to protect ourselves. Keep shit to yourself. You know what I'm saying? But
you
I
say
think it's
but still,
backfiring.
yeah. But overall, though, that's not self-inflicted, right?
No,
So what
no,
would you
no.
say outside of diet, you know, what we take into our bodies?
Yeah.
What are some of the other ways black men self-inflict the onset of disease or illnesses or even
Through
early
the trauma.
death?
Through the trauma.
Which is not self-inflicted, right?
The
Or is
trauma
it?
is not self-inflicted. The trauma is societal.
Yes.
It's institutionalized trauma. But the way we cope with the trauma is self-inflicted. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll self-medicate with alcohol.
that's right, that's right.
We'll self-medicate with cigarettes.
That's
we'll
right.
self-medicate with harder drugs. And then we become addicted. We become a servant to these harder drugs.
Yeah.
And then our lifestyle takes a toll. And then we begin to split. And then our reluctance and apprehension to find and seek help.
You just made me think of, I recently watched the Rick James documentary.
Yeah.
Nice, you know, talked about Buffalo, New York, like, you know, Benny and Conway, we were just
We
talking
just talking
about
them cats, yeah.
offline. But
The new generation.
another guy who got cocaine. You know,
Cocaine.
even Dave Chappelle joked about, you know,
Cocaine's
hell of a drug.
Yeah.
But you look at that and I'm like, this dude was, I think Rick James was 56,
Yeah.
7.
He was in his
somewhere
50s.
in 50s.
He was in his
Then
50s.
you had Michael Jackson, I think, was 50. I think Prince was 50, right? Which is crazy. That's
We
some
see,
whole,
man,
there's
it's a
some
whole
whole
other-
conspiracy stuff you hear about that.
You
Like
see it.
they were both killed. You know, but we ain't gonna get into that.
It could certainly be the case, but in the position
But
of,
they all self-inflicted themselves,
Come on.
like you said.
to be
but-
in the
but
position to be killed in that
not
manner.
just because they were rich and in that scene,
Right.
which has a lot to do with it. You know, you see a lot of stories where they first tried something because they were at a party.
They were at the party.
But because all them cats dealt with trauma. Michael, you know, Joe Jackson beating his ass, and Rick James was in the documentary. I can't recall it right now, but he went through stuff.
With his mother and then in the Army and in the Navy.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were the common
Prince,
denominator.
even, you know, what was that? Purple Rain back in the day shows you.
With the family and the
family.
dysfunction of his
Yeah.
interracial situation.
Yeah.
So you're
Exactly.
absolutely right. The common denominator
So the self-infliction comes from those things.
is the trauma. And as we see cats dealing with trauma,
But you can't, you know what? It goes back to a question you and I never talked about.
what's that?
And I still don't want to get off topic crazy, but
But nah, what's up?
trauma seems to be the cause of a lot of shit.
That's the common denominator.
How do you alleviate, remediate, or
Yeah.
eliminate, mitigate, you know,
the trauma? And
Trauma.
so and that's how
because
a
trauma
healthy,
comes from so different.
Because-
Family, sexual abuse,
Oh yeah.
this, that, lack of
A
educate, lack of
societal toxicity where you got a society that's racist to the core and you black, so you want the flip side of the racist coin. It ain't like you're a white man and you benefiting from it. You a black man and you being the victim of it. So that trauma inherently, whether you whatever, you hear it all the time when they say you can be in the penthouse or you can be, you know, in the damn tenant house, you still black in America.
But you know, some of the people watching this, you know, whether they be male, female, black, white,
Yeah.
they're gonna be like, man, we're talking about, you know, trauma and self-infliction of disease in a black man. And at every topic, it seems with you guys, you know, I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Right.
It always leads back to racism. Why does it always have to go back to racism, you know?
Hey, because you know they call it the original sin. And racism, they say the original sin in America is the slavery, but really the original sin is another form of racism that was imparted upon the Native American people. So racism in many forms took the foundation of this nation and built what it is today. So the seeds in the foundation got cracks and termites in it. So obviously anything that's built on that foundation is gonna be shaky.
That
so
sounds
the
like
relationship.
something that can't be overcome.
Well,
How
how did black people overcome it to the point where we still survive today? How did you overcome it? How did I overcome it? To a certain extent. Now no one is going to leave
Magic
unscathed.
formula. Yeah.
We gonna be
We all
touched.
go through stuff.
Whoa, for
That's
sure.
part of the journey.
That's a part of the journey. But
Yeah.
when we talk about self-inflicted disease and
Back
how
to
do we
that, yep.
overcome this, it all boils down to healthy ways of mitigating. You find something to believe in that's greater than yourself. You trust into a greater God. These things, whatever you call it, you know, but you tap into something that will allow you some supernatural energy to deal with these natural issues that are inherent. And when you know you a black man and you are part of a oppressed class of men, you become more strong and you know you fortify yourself. That's why it baffles me.
How do you balance strong and fortify, like you said, with what we were talking about earlier about we were taught to suck it up?
There you go. That's
So,
an excellent question.
yeah.
That's an excellent.
How do you?
The best way to balance that is to find and strike an agreement with yourself to know there's but so much I can carry on my
exactly.
own.
Yeah.
You can do what you
Learn
can do.
your limits.
Learn your limits. If you know your limits, then you can prevent a lot of the dis-ease that we suffer from in this country as men. Learn your limits and learn to share your love with your other brothers. Y'all share that with us. Get in the comments, talk to us.
Love to see your comments.